What's going on, ladies and gentlemen? I made a post about this a little earlier tonight, that I would be doing a video about this. And some of you may not know this, but I am what is called a gigantic nerd. Now, I'm not just into the occult. I'm not just into video games, pop culture, politics, but I'm also deeply interested in the sciences, especially things that probe mysteries, the things that kind of motivate humanity. I'd like to know about, well, mysterious things in physics and science, like chaos theory and quantum mechanics and alternatives to that, you know, the concept of the ether. I like to know about gravitation, magnetism, and I like to know about life. I like to know about life in the universe and what we know about it. Now, one of the more interesting and important topics concerning life, of course, is our own planet. It's very important for us to know about the life on our planet. But to me, that seems too mundane, even though there's still quite a few interesting mysteries there that we haven't uncovered. I'm really interested in life outside of this planet. I'm really excited to know, is there life elsewhere? When I say no, I mean I want to know in the mundane sense. I want to know intellectually. I want to have proof. I want to see the evidence for or against life existing elsewhere in the universe besides this planet. Now, most of you are going to parrot and rattle off immediately the statement that in this great big giant universe, it seems like it would be a really big waste of space with the millions and trillions of galaxies, each with their own millions and trillions of stars, each with their own millions and trillions of planets, that life would only be here on this one little blue dot in the middle of nowhere. There are some theories and ideas which actually do point to that being a possibility. Simply when you examine the fact that the odds against proteins forming naturally under the known physical laws and chemical laws are astronomically low. They're so low, according to some estimates, that you could spend more time than is even conceivable in your mind randomly shuffling all the chemicals in an ocean or whatever before randomly one protein would form, just one. The thought experiment that was shown in this one study that I saw was something along the lines of numbers that I can't even repeat, numbers that are absurd. That is how unlikely it is that they would happen naturally. Now, clearly it's happened once. Clearly life has appeared in this world. And I do think that part of the problem, of course, with anything to do with this, especially since it leans heavily into the metaphysical category, since the subject of life is a metaphysical concept, it is not a scientific term, because the scientific term for life includes sort of some gradients and gray areas. Things that are barely considered alive, like a virus is not really considered alive in the classical sense, and yet it is an organic living thing. Almost. It's almost like viruses are servitors, and cells are egregores. One's alive and one is not. But life is here. At least life as we understand it, life as we describe it in science, is here on this earth. And it's got several chemical signatures that we can look for. And we can say if we see these things, we know that life is probably or must be there. And again, of course, the subject of life is an important one in the metaphysical spiritual sense. What is life? Some people believe that life is derived from or an emergent property of baryonic matter, which is the normal stuff that you're made of, that you see and experience. When it interacts with each other, with itself, in the right proportions, in the right ways, complex arrangements of that baryonic matter can achieve a self-replicating system of organic compounds that we call life. Now, me personally, I think that's a terribly complicated unnecessarily complicated definition for life. I think life is one of the fundamental forces of our mundane universe, if you will. Life being consciousness, life being the energy of life, life being a kind of consciousness, and awareness, and experience. And you might argue that cells don't have self-awareness. I didn't say self-awareness, I meant just awareness. Awareness being a fundamental feature of reality, a fundamental feature of life itself. We could argue that that is its truly defining property, and if that is the case, even a rock is alive. So what we're really talking about is complex life. When we're talking in a scientific perspective, or in the perspective of my metaphysics, when we're talking about the search for life, we're not talking about life. We're looking for complex life. We're talking about biological life, life that we could stand on the surface of a planet, look down and say, hey, yeah, that's a tribble. Oh, that over there, that's an Ewok. Oh yeah, that's a Na'vi swinging from the tree over there. We're looking for aliens, beings, aliens. Someone said that I should sort of do the, it's not magic, but magic. It's not magic, but it's totally magic. Well, it's not just that we're looking for aliens, we're looking for alien life, we're looking for something in the universe that is like us, and not like us at the same time. Well, some of you may know, especially if you saw my post earlier today, that science, the monolith of science, has come forward yesterday, on the 14th, I believe, I got my dates right, and has announced that they have detected phosphenes on the planet Venus. Now, I've known about this for going on 3 or 4 years now because I'm a nerd and I keep track of these things. And when I heard that there was phosphenes on a planet, and I did my due diligence and understood what that meant, I knew that that meant it was one of the markers for life. They have found a chemical marker for life on Venus, but they kind of didn't talk about it much. Oh, it made a few YouTube channels, it made a few articles here and there, but it was in that, you know, it's a matter of if, not, it's a matter of when, not if, but we haven't found it for sure yet. Like Tabby's star, or any of these other big mysteries. And you know, as an occultist, the mysteries is something that I'm into, because anything that's occulted, not always my interest, but good chance I'm going to be interested. So they found phosphenes on the planet Venus, and so they announced yesterday, they made the announcement that they found it, and that according to their rigorous knowledge of the universe, Venus does not have any of the characteristic mechanisms of geology that could allow for the creation of phosphenes naturally in its system. In other words, there's no volcano spewing it out. There's no ocean where things are smashing together. There's nothing that could cause it. It is actually impossible for phosphenes to be there naturally, unless some sort of biological process was going on. Now, phosphenes are something that is poisonous to most life. It's poisonous to you and me. If we inhale it enough, it will kill us. Phosphenes are actually a chemical compound made of phosphorus with 3 hydrogen atoms. That's a basic phosphene. Which is rather ironic, as my friend Flowing Flyer pointed out, and someone that I know answered them before I could, and pointed out something I knew, which was quite funny. It was like, I could have made that post. It was great. Flowing Fire had pointed out, thank you, Nicolene, by the way, that it's rather interesting that the planet Venus, which was known as Phosphorus and Horus once upon a time, and is also known as a Luciferian planet, although I sort of contradict a little bit that Lucifer is from Venus. I think he's been conflated a little bit. I think the Lucifer incarnation is, but I do believe Lucifer is best embodied by Enki, Ea, and thus Neptune and Poseidon. But let's not go there. That might open a can of worms for some theist type people. Let us just accept that it is rather interesting that phosphenes, phosphorus, with hydrogen, being related to Horus and Phosphorus and thus Lucifer, by many account anyway, the light bringer. was, of course, the indicator for life on Venus. Now, I made notes today because there's a lot going on. I want to make sure my thoughts, and you know that this is an important thing if I put it in my magical journals. And let's see if I can keep up with this and translate it for you guys, because I do kind of like a, it's mostly in full sentences, but a little bit of shorthand here and there. Life on Venus. Phosphine found in clouds of Venus several years ago. Announcement made today confirming the discovery. Also announced that no other cause for phosphine is known on Venus. This makes life the most likely cause. Question. This begs the question of origin. Assuming that life is the answer, that life is on Venus, and maybe it's wishful thinking, but in my intuitive heart, I know life exists in this solar system, several places besides Earth. I know it does. And if I'm wrong, then my spirits have guided me wrong. And when I say that, like I said with context before, I mean biological life, not just conscious life, not just the consciousness of the all thing, the singularity of source. I mean biological life, knowable life, mundane life. I know it's here. And I know it's not just on planet Earth, and maybe it's dormant in many places, but I know it is common. I believe that life that they will find, if they honestly look for it, which they haven't, I know they say they have. They've sent probes to Mars, and never once have they apparently really looked for microbes in places, or maybe they have and they haven't found it recently, but they found other evidence for it. It's almost like, why didn't you send up a microscope? You know, maybe they did. Maybe they didn't find it. Maybe I'm wrong. But I'm not saying they'll find it on Mars. I'm not even convinced that Mars is where it's going to be found right now. Maybe it was there and it's been dead so long that all the fossil evidence is disputable, like that rock that they discovered in 1997, I believe it was, the Mars rock. And Bill Clinton made the announcement that they believe they discovered life on Mars, or at least it once had life, because of these fossils that were on this little space rock. It was ejected by a volcano. They found it in the South Pole in an ice sample. And apparently on this were little fossils that looked like little pills, that looked like little bacterium that may have been fossilized. And there was a big hullabaloo, but then it kind of just, nobody cared anymore for some reason. But no, I think that they're probably going to find ice like on Enceladus and Enceladus and some other places in the solar system. You know, they'll find it on the moons of Jupiter and Saturn. Almost certainly they'll find it in one of them. I'm so wickedly sure of this that I'd put money on it, that if they went there and looked, they'd find it. I've also been sure for a while that they would find it on Venus as well, up in the clouds. So they found this phosphine compound, which is released by certain, at least on Earth, bacterium which live in low oxygen environments. It's kind of like carbon dioxide from people. So the question is the origin of that life. This is one of the more interesting questions. If there is life on Venus, did it originate there? Something called abiogenesis. Did it originate on Venus? Did it independently form there with its own creation, the abiogenic creation? And it's one of the reasons why I enjoy this type of jasper, although there's some controversy, I guess, over whether it's legitimately as old or whatever as people say. There's some others that might be much older, but Kumbaba jasper has a very early form of life fossilized within it, a form of algae, which I believe wasn't actually green. I think it might have been blue algae, but it's green now as a fossil. It gives it its distinct green color. Did life form on Venus in its ancient past before it became the hellish planet that it is now? Or did life form elsewhere and get seeded there in a form of panspermia? Now, I personally am a proponent of panspermia. I think it is the most rational and logical solution to the question of life in the universe, because if life could happen, if it is rational for it to form out of the random order of chaos of nature as put in motion by itself, by the source, if all of that is rational. Now, of course, I do have my transcendent opinion about time, but let's just pretend that the story is true. If the mundane physical story is accurate, then it holds that life, it would be absurd to think that life only appeared in the universe 4, 3, 5 billion years ago on Earth, and that's it. It's more likely that life appeared earlier, much earlier, perhaps right after the Big Bang, perhaps even during the Big Bang. It might have even happened in the process. There's something called the Boltzmann Brain, which is essentially the idea that if you randomly shuffle all the elements in the universe enough, there will eventually come a moment when the particles and baryonic matter and electrons or whatever will form a pattern that is exactly like that of a brain or a mind within a brain. That there could be an electrical cloud that forms that is exactly like the electrical current that's in your brain that supposedly gives you a mind. Supposedly, I say, because I am not convinced that consciousness, in fact, I know consciousness cannot be created by the brain, and if they ever do prove me wrong, I will have to change my entire life around to fit that. I'll have to abandon all of my work, pretty much, and decide that it is psychological rather than spiritual, and I'll be fine with that, but it's going to be one hell of a ride. In fact, it might be kind of fun, but be easier, that's for sure. Be a lot easier. So life could have formed just in the if space is infinite as they think it is, or very nearly so. It's either infinite or so close to infinite you couldn't measure it, because they've determined that the plane of reality is pretty close to zero. It's either zero or within so many decimal points of zero that it might as well be zero. It could be just a calculatory error. What that means is the universe probably goes on forever. And if it goes on forever, that means that there's so much space that there's room for any combination of particles you can imagine to happen sooner or later. In fact, not only is there room for any combination to happen, but they will happen many, many times. And they will repeat. In fact, it will be like a fractal, where you will have an infinite number of the same universe in the same universe. That is possibly the explanation for the multiverse. And hopefully your brain's getting blown right now, because I don't like talking unless I'm blowing your mind. This is the kind of stuff that I'm constantly thinking about. This is why I wear glasses, because I'm a giant nerd. So, life could have been evolved, could have happened by chance or by whatever mechanism, oodles of billions of years ago, when the universe first began to expand into existence. And that's assuming that model is correct, because it may not be. Life may have formed back then, and it may have formed the way it is now, just some variation of it, recognizably so. Something with genetics, although perhaps very different. Maybe it's got like 3 base pairs instead of this many or that many. Maybe it doesn't even use base pairs. Maybe it's got some other system of keeping track, but it would be something recognizable, something organic. And we know that chemistry and science tends to seek the lowest energy state. So that means it will probably trend and tend towards something that is a minimal complexity for it to continue. In other words, the idea of science is that life is inevitable, because it actually, even though it tends to order the entropy, in other words, even though it tends to swim upstream against entropy, it does so in a way that would actually be a lower energy state, ultimately. It's easier for chemistry to become life than it is for it to just disappear. If that makes sense. Hopefully I'm making sense with that statement. So life, or the things we call life, the genetics of life, the biology of life, maybe is the best way to put it, because I do believe life and biology are not exactly the same thing. So the biology of life may have evolved or appeared billions upon billions of years ago, and it may have been seeded throughout the universe. Maybe it's some sort of hardy bacteria that can take the frigid vacuum of space. Maybe it was formed and then it latched onto space rocks and they got fossilized somehow, but in such a way that they could be reanimated if they hit the right conditions, which is something that is known. There are, I believe, bacteria or something, it might have been fungus, something that was several, billions of years, or 70 million years old, something like that that they were excavated, and they added the nutrients and the water that they needed, and they sprang right back to life and began multiplying again, like nothing, like no time had passed. So it is possible for things to exist that are alive, that are dormant for very long periods, and they could have been seeded on multiple worlds. That is actually much more rational to my mind than assuming that a 1 in a Google, Google to the Google's power of probability happened 2 times, 3 times, 4 times, let alone 2 or 3 or 4 times in the same solar system. It is way more likely that life exists everywhere and seeds habitable places. This is actually a much more natural pattern. It's one we see in our current iteration of nature that we know, which is Earth. We see that. We don't see life evolving separately in different places. In other words, we don't see abiogenesis happening in 2 or 3 places on Earth, and if it did, only one took over. So what we see instead is life being a product of the same abiogenesis, perhaps, and it evolves and spreads and seeds itself everywhere. I mean, the word seed, do I have to explain it any more than that to you? You see seeds everywhere in nature. You see spores and seeds and sperms and eggs and all of these kind of mechanisms where life seeds itself in new places, and it seeks out environments and habitats that it can live in. So to my mind, it's much more rational and logical that life originated everywhere in the universe, perhaps, or even if it was in one place, it has spread pretty much, especially when you consider the concept of expansion, that about 400 million years after the Big Bang event, it cooled off enough that you could finally see light and space began to explode with expansion. It is possible that something the size of a dog around the time of a million years after the Big Bang, with inflation, could become something the size of a galaxy. Okay, that's the kind of orders of magnitude that the expansion had. It's huge. Space blew up like a giant balloon. So it's possible that something evolved and spread out in a small little patch, and then basically became, as far as we can understand, could have become ubiquitous everywhere. And then it would have seeded itself in the new habitats that were formed by that act, as the energy state diminished, as it dropped down to level. So did life form on Venus, or did it form elsewhere and come to Venus? Or some hybrid? Maybe life formed on Venus and came to Earth, or maybe Earth and Venus were both seeded by the same Earth, the same life, or maybe Earth seeded Venus. Any permutation of that equation is possible. And again, I personally believe in panspermia myself. So what are the implications here? Well, if life originated via abiogenesis on Venus, then that means the odds of life existing everywhere in the universe pretty much become 100%. Because if you have 2 cases of abiogenesis in the same solar system on 2 separate planets with completely different circumstances, then life should be found pretty much everywhere that those circumstances are even remotely favorable. They should be everywhere. Most likely we will find life in the universe. But the same could be said for panspermia, but because scientists tend to be a show-me kind of mentality, you could argue that panspermia only works within a solar system, and then beyond the solar system it's impossible because the distances are just too great. The distance from here to Alpha Centauri. How many millions of years would it take a rock ejected from a volcano to travel to another planet? And what are the odds of it even reaching a planet? You know, not just continuing on in empty space forever because the distances are so great. In fact, the odds of you being ejected from this planet and landing on another planet, if you're ejected in a random direction, the odds of landing on a planet are pretty close to 0. The chance it would take so long, it's not even comprehensible. So you'd need a lot of those little seeds. The space would have to be full of them. But it could be possible. It could be possible. Over long enough timelines, impossibilities tend to become possibilities. Tend to become certainties, in fact. So if panspermia is true, it could only be limited to this solar system. It could even be just limited to this local cluster of stars. It could be limited to just this galaxy. Or it could be universe-wide. because of my spiritual slash scientific mind, I do believe that life as a metaphysical property of reality is everywhere. And life has a tendency to shape its own experience so that it can manifest and it can have an embodied experience. And so to me it makes sense that life would be everywhere, that it would form everywhere, that there would be gloop glops and Vulcans and Boffins and whatever else, Bolthans, I mean, from Star Wars, whatever else, there should be them. They should be out there. In fact, if the universe is infinite, probably everything that we're thinking of exists. There probably are Avatar-like beings out there, like from the movie Avatar, like the Na'vi. There probably are other humans exactly like us elsewhere in the universe, probably even having the same conversation on a planet just like ours, with another planet just like ours orbiting around nearby. But some of the most important implications of this, if life is this plentiful, if we find life in this solar system, be it panspermia or abiogenesis that causes it, the Fermi Paradox becomes a big, big issue. Right now, we only know of life one place in the universe. And as sad as that is, that's kind of comforting, because that means that we don't have any models to compare ourselves to. So for all we know, we're the first, only, and will be the only life that happens in the universe. So the future cannot be predicted at all because there's no other models to compare to. However, if life exists in multiple places, why have we not detected it at all? Or the more accurate version of that question is, why have we not detected advanced life? Of course, the word advanced to people of a spiritual nature can sound stupid, because what we think of as advanced is a very personal and subjective thing. You could argue that humans are not the most advanced species on Earth, that there are many more advanced or equally advanced species, because they all are winners of the genetic lottery. They've all gotten to where they are after billions of years of evolution. So they're all successful. They're all advanced. So what we mean by advanced is we mean culturally advanced. We mean advanced in a way that we can communicate. We're talking about aliens that are driving stick shifts, or have radios, or have a united federation of planets that they, do their thing in. Why haven't we found that? Why haven't we seen a star cruiser swing through our system and, talk to them? And if we have, well, then it's being covered up. But even that is hard to believe, because it would require even the amateur astronomers and amateur radio operators and stuff to have covered it up. So it would have to use systems and mechanisms that are not part of our normal scientific culture, even for amateurs. It would have to be something so unusual that even somebody with a really good backyard telescope couldn't see it. Possible, very possible. I do have a theory that the idea of space travel, the way we understand it as moving matter from place to place, seems to be an extremely inefficient way to travel. It seems more apparent that it would be easier to transfer our consciousness from point to point than our actual bodies. It'd be easier to, like with Tesla's mind transfer device, to send our consciousness around, to send thoughts around, to send an avatar, if you will, than it would be to send a physical body. So I would think that a sufficiently advanced culture with sufficiently advanced science wouldn't bother getting in a rocket ship and flying to Earth just to do what? Shake our hand? What could we possibly have that they would want, that they would dare travel across the universe, unless that travel was so simplistic to them that it made sense? But then again, to get to that point of being capable of doing that, you'd probably have to get past a barrier where it's so inefficient to travel by body, you would start to learn to travel by consciousness. And we're already doing that. The internet's already allowing that. We're already traveling from place to place just on our screens, and our consciousness is maybe not the same way it would be if we did it with our bodies, but it's still something. We're still able to remotely sense and experience a place and a person. I do this every day as part of my living. I do video conferences every single day. And I have no misunderstanding in my mind that what I'm talking to is my computer screen in which there's lights flickering that look like people. I'm not really looking at a person. I'm talking to a machine, and that machine is talking to another machine, and then that machine is communicating with the person. But still, that is a form of telepresence. I'm doing what is called telepresence. And telepresence could become so advanced that it has no limits. It could be instantaneous, perhaps. There might be a way. Let's say warp drive is real, right? So in theory, warp drive would allow you to travel with your body from one place to another in a very short amount of time, if not a zero amount of time. You know, like in Star Trek. And eventually there's ways to do it that are instantaneous with wormholes and things, right? Well, why would you send your body with the inherent risks of sending a body? You might not even have a body at this point, but let's just, for argument's sake, say you do. Why send your body when you can instead send some sort of an avatar? And that avatar might not even have to have a body. We could conceivably imagine that a culture that was so advanced that could send matter through the universe could create some sort of avatar that is invisible and has no baryonic quality to it. It could literally be a telepathic mind being transmitted through a wormhole and hitting your brain. That could be what ghosts and spirits and demons might be. Possible. That's been put out there a lot. A lot of people start off with the possibility in their head that, you know, spirits are aliens. In fact, Crowley went there. Of course, there's a lot of people who disagree and say that I found personally that the more I delve into the occult and the mystical and the metaphysical, the less I care about aliens being real. You know, the less they seem real. They are, but, you know, there's life out there, I'm sure of it. But the less I think about little green men and UFOs, in other words, I start thinking more about alien consciousnesses instead. That's where I go. So moving bodies around seems really inefficient and foolish. So, why don't we see other alien civilizations in the universe that are like ours? Because we know that we've been broadcasting signals that if you were within a certain distance with the right equipment, stuff that we have, you could pick up those signals and translate them into television and radio, and you could understand it. Or at least know that it was artificial, and know that it was being sent intentionally by a being. Why don't we see any of that? The SETI program, they call it. Why don't we see any of that? So there's something called the Fermi Paradox, which asks that question. If life exists in the universe, why don't we see it? And then it poses answers to that question. The solutions to the Fermi Paradox are what are called great filters. Because there's not a lot of answers that explain it without also explaining the absence. So until we discover other advanced technological life, we have to assume that it doesn't exist, at least not within our ability to sense. In other words, not within our corner of the galaxy anyway, where we have the ability to detect such things. And given the age of the universe, we would actually expect that there would be civilizations so advanced that they would make Star Wars and Star Trek look simplistic. There should be galaxies, there should be level 3 or even higher. At the least, level 2 civilizations on the Kardashev scale, meaning that they have the ability to control stars. We should be able to detect that, and we don't. So what do we see? We see emptiness and nothingness and silence. And that's terrifying. That's like terrifying on a Lovecraftian level. Because that implies that there is no life in the universe besides our own, or that there's something called the Great Filter. And those great filters are concepts. That doesn't mean that there is necessarily a race of aliens that goes around annihilating everybody like in the games like Mass Effect. Although that is one of the potential answers. But the theory goes that life evolves, creates technology, and for whatever reason either doesn't achieve the technological state we have and we are the first, which is scary, or it has and it destroys itself in such a way that we'll never notice that they existed because the signals were sent long ago and they've stopped. Now either one of those is scary because that means we've either passed the Great Filter or it's right ahead of us somewhere because we're sending out signals. And if sending out signals is that thing, that no-no thing that we can't seem to experience, no one else has done it, we've either passed the Great Filter or We're right up to it because we're going to be cut off any minute now before our signals would reach anybody else. Science is dealing with a lot of absolutes here in this equation because we only have one sample to go from. We don't have multiple samples, so we don't know. To me, it seems absurd in a way because these extreme possibilities are only possible with one example. So finding life elsewhere in the solar system actually is a little scary. Because if finding that life, even if it's panspermia, which does not guarantee extrasolar life, finding life in this solar system at least ups the chances that there's life elsewhere in the universe besides even the solar system. We found it on 2 planets, so therefore the odds just went up exponentially that there's life everywhere. And if it was an abiogenetic origin, that means life should be everywhere. And if life is everywhere, why are we the only ones that have televisions, radios, computers, cars, planes, all this crap? So that implies that for whatever reason, we're either really special or we're fucked and we just don't know it yet. Either we've passed all these great filters where some disease usually wipes out a species before they can reach this level, or we're the only biological life in the immediate universe that evolved a brain. Maybe everything else is just pond scum. Maybe everything else is just monkeys swinging from trees. The most they've ever done is bang 2 sticks together and they talk that way. Maybe that's the closest they've gotten to the internet. Maybe humanity is the first and only species in the universe, or at least our local part of the galaxy, to achieve what we've done. Ever. Or it's happened before and they've been killed off. Or it happened before and they evolved away from that technology. And if they have, what form would that technology take? And again, as I said before, I truly personally believe that the idea of moving our bodies around, as dramatic and romantic as that is, it makes for some great science fiction. I personally think that that's a very immature perspective. And I'll give you an example. 150 years ago, the idea of me being able to talk to somebody in California or Australia and do what I do would require that I bodily get on an airplane or a boat and travel to them and have the conversation face to face. Then the telephone happens, the television happens, the internet happens, and now it is completely rational for me to have this conversation with all of you and never once set foot in your home or your life. The natural extrapolation of the patterns of life, the chaotic patterns of fractals, is that one would assume that that pattern continues and expands and becomes a new level of sameness. Because all fractals, you zoom in, the smaller you go, the more it looks like what came before it, just a little different, and then eventually the whole pattern totally repeats from square one again eventually. It's a cyclic thing with self-similarity throughout. So one would assume that if step one is person-to-person conversation, touch, right? In simple biology, touch and chemical signals is how everything communicates. Well, eventually you get to sound and light. Then eventually you get to making sound with sticks and drums and things like that. Then eventually you get to radio waves and signals and telephones and internet and telepresence via some sort of telepathic capability. Mind link, like Tesla is developing. Maybe Tesla's developing mind link because aliens are telling us, hurry the fuck up, we want to talk to everybody. And I know you're trying to do it on your own time so people are ready, but develop this thing so that we can come in there and talk to everybody. And make you all our slaves and we can mate with your women like in the old 50s sci-fi horror movies, right? No, but for real, think about it. So they discover life on Venus. Of course, it happens in 2020. And I do think that they're going to confirm it, because this has been something that's been bandied about for a while. And it makes a lot of sense that this would be the easiest. In fact, this is one of the reasons why for years I've been saying, for space exploration purposes, instead of harping on and on about Mars, which is a really dangerous, risky thing, people will die if we go to Mars. It's not a safe trip. It's a lot easier to go to the moon and then to Venus. If we made a moon base, a moon colony, a good one, a city, or if we made you know, space stations, what's the word for them? I forget. O'Neill cylinders or Dyson swarms. If we made those kinds of things and lived in those and then traveled to other planets, Venus makes a lot more sense. It's easier to get to. We could easily develop floating platforms like Cloud City from Empire Strikes Back. We could have a Bespin floating right now in Venus. It is possible. Our technology is there. We just have to develop it so that we have it, but the science is there. We know how to do it. So Venus makes a much more logical first choice for colonizing and visiting with people than Mars does. And it just so happens to have the most likely candidate, barring the moons of Saturn and Jupiter, which are much further away, mind you, for the possibility of life. We can very easily get to Venus by comparison. Much more easily communicate with Venus than Mars or Jupiter if we send a probe. I fully believe within a few years, if not sooner, there will be legitimate confirmation. I think right now the reason why they're announcing it the way they're doing it is because scientists are tentatively sure. You still have some skeptics saying there's not life there until we physically pick it up in our hands and smell it and lick it and rub it on our eyeballs. But I think scientists know. Their models show what they suspect intuitively. Life is there. They know it is. And you can tell by the energy in the way the announcements come out. My intuition's never wrong about this. Although, they may announce a week from now that they were wrong, and they tend to lie about things, though, don't they? So while doing research for this and making notes about all this, I came across some interesting things. Tesla, who, by the way, also believed we were all one. He was a metaphysicist. He was a scientist. He was many things. He was actually, I don't want to say that he and I were the same. I don't think I was as smart as him, obviously. But similarly, I'm an autodidact, and I am also something that some psychiatrists call a scanner. I'm like a Renaissance man. I have a million hobbies, and I'm good at all of them. So Tesla, who believed that we were all one, is the subject of a lot of controversy, obviously. He even claimed that he spoke with aliens from Mars on his radio. So he's a subject of a lot of controversy, but interestingly enough, Tesla is also associated with the planet Venus in that in a declassified document titled Nikola Tesla, Part 03 of 3, one paragraph states the following. So remember, this is declassified FBI documents. Quote unquote, the space people visited the Tesla engineers many times and informed us that Tesla was from Venus, brought to this planet as a baby, and was left with Mr. and Mrs. Tesla in a remote mountain province in 1856 in what is now Yugoslavia. End quote. Now, let me be clear. There's a lot of disinformation and a lot of bullshit that happens. Keep in mind, however, that Trump's uncle, was it his uncle or granduncle? Either way, one of his uncles stole all of Tesla's documents and secrets upon his death. No one knows where they are. There are several trunks, several dozen perhaps, trunks filled with his notes, journals, and experiments and materials that have never been found. And the only trace that we know is Trump's uncle, who did find something and didn't return everything, is the way that it's been told. Everything from death rays to everything we're talking about here. We might have interstellar transportation or communication at this point. Never know. Because they don't want you to know. Why? That's a tougher question to answer. It doesn't make a lot of sense. It seems like they would have just found a way to integrate it, and then to, you know, if they don't want general humanity to know, why would they let humanity get so out of hand with it? Why would they let us have any control over anything if they have that much control? So I personally believe that the idea that space people from Venus drop Tesla off is bullshit. But I do find it interesting. I find it's an interesting connection. And in a prior entry, I made a point to put this in my journal. In a prior entry, number 7 happened, I believe, on the 2nd. Entry 2, entry 5. I label all my entries, by the way. You should too. It's right around the time that I came up with the chakra meditation that I shared the other day. Entry 8. I should have bookmarked it. Easier to find. I do like, I'm learning to love journaling again. It's been so long since I actively journaled, guys. And since I've actively gone back to journaling, whenever something interesting happens, I've just been so happy to do it. Yeah, so Unta, which is one of my familiars given to me by King Paimon or King Aomon, depending upon what you prefer, he gave me this being, which was supposedly one of his scribes from his actual life when he was an Atlantean. And this scribe and I went for a walk, and I've had a little trouble talking to him. Like, I've been working with him for over a year, and my interactions with him have been a little, I should do a special video just on him. My interactions with him have been cloudy, in that I don't usually see him clearly. He's usually more of a, he's not a shadow, but he takes like on a shadowy countenance. I can't see his face clearly until recently. He never speaks. He's just kind of there holding books and keeping track of my knowledge and you know, guiding me to research. He's like the scribe and sage of my astral temple. And well, I went for a walk with him, and one of the things he told me, and I said, you know, I forget what the question was. Let me see. Yeah, he said, I was having trouble, obviously, the last couple of weeks. As I said, I had to do my sanctuary, and I had to do all this other stuff. And I asked him for help and everything. He says, you're too attached, Thorne. You know it. Seek us in the heavens. And the word Venus came to mind. I made a point of that. Make sure that was in my journal. Seek us in the heavens, and the word Venus was circled. Seek us in the heavens. What does that mean? I have some suspicions, but what does that mean? I honestly can't talk about that in this video. This video is already just about 50 minutes long. And I usually like to make my videos 20 or 30 minutes, and this one went really long, but hopefully you guys enjoyed this. I have a lot more thoughts on these subjects. These are the kind of videos I'd like to do in addition to just pure magic and spirituality. I'm not just things that go bump in the night and superstition, guys. I'm a very, very widely read and experienced person who's into a lot of different subjects. But if you guys prefer, I will continue to put them through a spiritual lens, which is my norm anyway. Everything I look at, I put through a spiritual lens. Everything. Or at least a metaphysical one. Anyway, guys, this is D.H. Thorne. If you like my content, you want to support what I do, you want to make sure that I'm able to keep doing this every week, there's ways you can support me financially. They include Patreon, but especially Subscribestar. I started one, and I got 0 people on there. So I did that because Patreon has issues with free speech. And there may come a time that what I do offends somebody, and I'd like to be able to have support through something that is more of a free speech oriented program, so I have Subscribestar. I'm also on BitChute for my videos, although I don't upload there every time I make a video. It tends to capture them and upload them for me, and then occasionally I'll put one special for there. I need to build my audience there, but I'm just lazy about it. YouTube is much more rewarding so far, and that's where I've been focusing my energy. But YouTube is getting weird with censorship, so any way you guys can help me out, support me, you can go to Patreon, you can go to Subscribestar, or better yet, I kind of prefer that you get something for your support, and I offer 3 different books. You have Become the Maelstrom, you have Shadownomicon, and you have the Infernal Vampire Handbook. And Become the Maelstrom has been universally just about, you know, I've got like 1 negative review and a couple of medium reviews. It's a 4.5 stars on Amazon with over, I think I'm approaching 80 reviews or 70 reviews. I have to check, it's been a while. And it's doing very well in terms of reception. People really appreciate that book. So if you want to support me and you want to get something for your efforts, check me out there. I'm also in association with a beautiful girl, Elena, who runs Limitless Liberations on Etsy. And I should start putting the link in my descriptions. Hopefully I'll remember to do that in this video so you can go there. She offers my sigil, my altar tops there. And you can use those things in ritual. They're very useful. And she sold a few of them to very happy people, and I get a little bit from that, but you're mostly helping her, so I don't get as much from that as she does. And if you want to support me, you can of course just like, subscribe, and share these videos, and that will help me out a lot. But even if you don't, I will do my best to continue doing this. But this is my career, this is my day job, this is what I do every day, all day, is I think about spiritual stuff, and I'm lucky enough I am blessed enough by my spirits and my courage and my weaknesses and all of those things that make me who I am to sit here every day and just pine away for higher thoughts and then find a way to communicate them with you. And if you appreciate that work, then that's what I've been sent here to do. Thank you very much for supporting and recognizing that. In the meantime, guys, this is the Thorne, as I said. Mind the shadows. I'll see you next time.